of this research was to establish the connection between golf and health risks by exploring the golf industry, its beginnings and growth in the U.S., as well as its history of chemical usage. Then tie that into the blossoming legal landscape that surrounds the industry in hopes of creating more sustainable policies and making the game safer for its participants. Let's begin with a brief history of the boom and bust cycle of the golf industry. In the 1920s, golf was for the rich and affluent. Economic growth in the Roaring Twenties meant that more people could afford to play at private clubs, and 600 courses were built each year from 1923 to 1926. This was the golden era of golf course architecture. But what followed the 1920s was the Great Depression and World War II, the first bust. Around 1960, the second boom occurred. Arnold Palmer, Jack Nicklaus, Gary Player, and President Dwight Eisenhower were televised playing golf. At that point, TVs were in the home, so it became a widespread attraction to the game. The U.S. government facilitated the spread of golf in the post-war years as well. From 1963 to 1975, the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Farmers Home Administration offered $10.5 million in subsidized loans to assist rural communities in improving public recreation facilities, and more than half of that went into golf course and driving range facilities. 380 golf courses were built each year during this time, and the majority of them were public. But by the 1970s, high interest rates, inflation, a gas crisis, the end of the Vietnam conflict, and a contraction of the economy, and several other factors saw the golf industry take a big hit. But the 1990s saw golf's greatest boom. With the aid of computers, the golf industry was able to track market trends and social and economic projections. The National Golf Foundation made a plan to build one new course a day every year in that decade, and they did. They built almost 400 courses a year in the 1990s. Golf courses were built on bigger plots to accommodate houses in between holes, and they became attractive features in new residential areas. Golf communities were on the rise. With Tiger Woods, the perception of golf as being played by middle-aged men in double-knit plaid pants changed forever. Golf industry became tied with the real estate industry, and 12% of all golf courses in the United States today are in master-planned communities. The former vice president of the PGA Tour once said, "The democratization of the game in terms of the number and kind of golf courses built has occurred without regard for the environmental, economic, or social consequences." And indeed, the environmental footprint for these new courses nearly doubled in order to maximize golf course lot frontage for the accompanying real estate development. There are 16,000 golf courses in the United States, occupying about 2.2 million acres. That accounts for roughly 43% of the total courses worldwide. And when you think about water use, nutrient use, pesticide use, and energy use for all of those places, David Huber is certainly right. Golf does not seem a very sustainable industry. It's easy to see the vast green sea of golf courses and assume that green means good, but the industry's environmentally friendly practices fall short of their potential. Despite their idyllic appearance, golf courses require a host of pesticides, fertilizers, and water to maintain their appearance. It's what I like to call their synthetic aesthetic. And the health implications for golfers, community residents, wildlife, and the local ecology because of that are very concerning. Each course uses 200 million gallons of water annually and applies 4 to 7 times the amount of pesticides per acre as the agriculture industry. Chlorpyrifos, glyphosate, and 2,4-D acid are some of the most common herbicides used for weed control. Agent Orange is made with 2,4-D acid. Indeed, golf course management has never been great historically, even back to the heavy metal-based pesticides in the 1940s and 1950s. In 1995, the Attorney General of New York was concerned about groundwater contamination from pesticide runoff, and so conducted a study on Long Island golf courses' chemical toxicity. They found several pesticides on the market that had been identified as probable human carcinogens, and some that had been linked to birth defects, nervous system disorders, and reproductive problems. In addition, as this report discussed, pesticide use had the potential to threaten wildlife and contaminate natural resources. In fact, those pesticides are some of the most commonly used still today. This adapted image from Beyond Pesticides shows some of the health effects. Most of these pesticides are chosen for their effectiveness in weed control. For example, 2,4-D functions by spurring incessant division of the cells in the plant that transport water and nutrients, thus inducing a cancer-like process that slowly kills the pesky weed. But if that's the case, we should consider if it intentionally induces a cancer-like process in plants, what does 2,4-D do to humans? This cycle shows how pesticides move and remain in the environment in many different ways. Those that are not absorbed by the crop or weed or degraded in the soil can vaporize into the atmosphere or leach into watercourses. And this is more concerning when you consider the long history of this maintenance regime and the bioaccumulation of these toxic chemicals. Golfers are exposed to pesticide residues every time they play. Tiny aerosolized particles can stick to your skin and clothes, and most often absorbed by your hands and legs. They can also drift on the wind, extending to almost half a mile from the site of application, which is especially concerning for community residents that live on the golf course or within that range. And this has a lot of negative effects. A recent concern has been the disruption of our endocrine system, and people don't usually realize how little exposure it takes to disrupt a system. In 2018, a landmark legal decision established the causal connection between Monsanto's glyphosate product Roundup and cancer. Dwayne Johnson was a grounds manager who used Roundup every day of his career. He was a certified applicator of Monsanto's product and used it according to the application rules. After 2 major spills, even while wearing the standard personal protection equipment, he got lesions on 80% of his body. But he continued to use Roundup because he was told that it was safe, and soon after, he was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Dwayne Johnson sued Monsanto. Glyphosate caused his cancer, and Monsanto knew it, was the claim. The jury upheld that claim and said that Monsanto Corporation was responsible for causing Dwayne Johnson's non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and that they knew about its carcinogenic effects. It was an enormous decision from the courts. Typically, as a matter of tort law, the defense destroys the plaintiff's argument by introducing the host of confounding variables that are also known carcinogens that might also have contributed to their cancer, things like bacon, fluoride toothpaste, and cigarettes. This case surfaced information regarding the dangers of pesticide use and chemical exposure, and it called into question corporate product analysis, chemical license processing, and the EPA's risk assessment protocol. It's likely that these cases are only going to continue. There are almost 500,000 golf course employees, and it is not unique to the golf industry. Other sports that play on managed turf have concern as well. In our day and age, we are discovering the effect of long-term exposure to toxins. And yes, for some with a stronger or less vulnerable endocrine system, it might take 30 years for this illness to present itself, but by then it's too late. Any amount of exposure to these chemicals is detrimental. It is important to remember that all of these human effects also occur in wildlife populations that use golf courses as habitat. To recap, we talked about the boom and bust cycles in the 20th century and how it grew golf in major ways. We now have a widespread problem, and the linkage of golf with the real estate industry has perpetuated this issue. The industry needs to change for fear of being drawn into future litigation, and all of this demonstrates why it's a relevant issue and time to make golf, quote-unquote, green. In 2018, the Golf Course Superintendents Association mandated that every state come up with a best management practices, or BMP, by 2020. These BMPs are a great first step. However, they don't contain enough conservation strategies or remediation plans to help the environment recover from at least 50 years of chemical damage from golf courses. And any BMP is necessarily incomplete, as science is always adapting. To be good, they need to be flexible, continuing to use the best science to update their management practices. And overall, they use vague, suggestive language when telling courses about natural and organic practices. Additionally, there is no compliance component that requires courses to follow the best management, and it's very difficult for superintendents to keep up with all of that input from their membership, from the GCSAA, from the USGA, etc. The goal for best management should really try to answer the question, how can we improve the landscape while also promote the health and safety of golfers? Golf will ultimately become more enjoyable as we reestablish the ecosystem health and promote the natural beauty of the game. We can work towards this with a few simple, immediate actions. Things like mowing above 1.75 inches, making sure that the turf is consistently aerated, testing pH levels, using natural fertilizers that are certified by the Organic Materials Review Institute, using natural pesticides in moderation, or at least as a last option, using wetting agents, removing leaves to reduce the time that grasses are saturated and prevent fungal diseases, and ultimately rely on cultural practices like hand weeding to maintain the turf. Establishing an open line of communication with club members, greens committees, and management is additionally important. Coordinating with local wildlife groups or state fish, wildlife, and parks organizations to identify which parts of the property can be utilized for wildlife refuge areas, protected habitats, or stopovers for migrating animals is another option. Although this seems like a negative issue, there is so much hope to turn the industry around. And that's the ultimate vision for this industry, one of hope and excitement. Like I said before, golf facilities cover roughly 2.2 million acres across the U.S. This is a tremendous opportunity to convert these landscapes into healthy ecosystems, one that I hope we can inspire the industry to take advantage of.